I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the podcast where we know everything and nothing about memoirs. And so if you say, well, I'd rather just read the memoir, go ahead and have a really nice time. But if you say, okay, I'd really like to know what they know about whatever they're saying, you've come to the right place. Because this week we're reading Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. Claire,
Yeah.
if you were to write a memoir about your life, what would you title last week's chapter?
I'm not sure this would make it in the book, but I just am once again struck by how me and Bug are truly the same person. And what's interesting actually about that? What's kind of interesting about that, now that I think about it?
Yeah, okay, what's interesting?
Is that I think if you polled the audience, like I'm everybody's least favorite, you're everybody's second favorite, and then Bug is everybody's favorite. But the irony there is Bug is me. So like if you think you like Bug but you don't like me, guess what? You're lying. Okay.
Bug even started drinking whole milk because she wants to be just like Aunt Claire, and she has allergies and a body that cannot handle it.
I don't know if I've talked about it on here. I'm trying to run. My goal is to do the Brooklyn Half next spring, which is a race that I have signed up for and paid for multiple times. But this year, I'm going to show up. I'm going to run it.
Last year, was that 2 years ago?
No, it was a year and a half ago.
When you made me sign up for it with you. And so then I tried to train for it.
And then I didn't train, but I did make us eat 6 pounds of pasta the night before.
And then we woke up the morning of the race and it was raining.
And I just said, we can't, right?
So then we went to Equinox and got guest passes. And
no, I was a member back then. I brought you in on a guest pass. I may have even paid $20 for you to go because I knew it was my fault.
And then we ran on the treadmill. Claire sat on the ground while
I walked a lot.
And then you sat on the ground.
Okay, because for hours? You want me to walk for hours?
That's what we signed up for. We signed up to walk for hours.
I was misled.
We even had the t-shirts. I think I donated mine because I said, I can't in good conscience have this.
This year, I want to do it. So I've been trying to run. And last weekend was my first run without stopping challenge for myself. Spoiler alert, I stopped 3 times. But
no, you're allowed to stop.
Ashley says that because she'll go and do an 8-miler and she'll be like, yeah, take a little break. It's 90 degrees outside. And I'm like, I'm trying to get to the end of the block. Anyway, for the first time in my life, I finally used Strava to see how fast and how far I was going. And I will say in my defense, even though I kept stopping, I would check my Strava and I was always going so much faster than I realized. And so I gave myself grace. And then I'm like, well, no wonder I'm huffing and puffing. I'm sprinting up these streets. And I really was like, oh my God, this is what Bug does. Because I kept saying every time I'd stop, I'd be like, all right, Claire, just go slower and don't stop.
But there's a squirrel.
I was like, I'm going so slow. I'm going so slow. And then I'd be like, but I'm huffing and I'm puffing and I'm heaving and I'm hoeing. I got to take a break. And then I'd look and I'd be like, I'm not going any slower than I was. I could not slow myself down, even though I could not maintain the pace I was at. And I was like, that is exactly how Bug plays.
Yeah.
Bug goes so hard and then is just fucking in the corner puking, dry heaving. Her body cannot handle what she's doing to her heart. And then the second she's back with it, she's going just as hard. And I was
and also, just to clarify for anyone who is unaware, Bug is the fastest dog in the dog park.
Yeah, I'm not the fastest girl in the girl park, but the girl park is Brooklyn.
Sometimes when Bug is playing at the park, I hear other humans go, she is so fast.
I mean, she is so fast.
It makes my heart go pitter patter. I glow with pride.
You look at her and sometimes you just want to be like, Bug, just go at a normal pace. Sometimes I'm like, oh, she's going to kill herself.
No.
When she is pulling on the leash and choking herself out because she can't slow down and walk at a speed that's normal. Okay. Aren't you scared she's going to die?
I'm a little nervous. Yeah. But sometimes I pick her up and I carry her. And she
does this thing where she can't walk normal. So she'll pull so hard. She's choking and you just hear her going and you're like, Bug, just stop, just reduce the pace, and she won't. And I'm like, that's me too. Me and Bug, man, we have the same mental illness, we have the same learning disability.
That's so true. You look at yourself in the mirror and you go, bitch, I have something to say to you.
I don't know who's who. I go, why are you so aggressive? Nobody likes that masculine energy you bring to a room, but really I'm saying it to myself. Ashley, do you have anything about last week that you haven't told me yet?
Yeah, okay. So I've learned my lesson the hard way. As many of you know, I've been on a journey to look at my phone less.
Give up.
I'm done. I'm fucking sick of it, okay? Because yesterday was a very nice day. And then in the afternoon, suddenly it went up like 15 degrees and 1,000,000,000% humidity. And I don't know how that happened. But anyway, so I get home from the studio. I decide to take Bug for a little walk. And I put my phone on the charger and I say, leave it here. You don't need it for a little walk. And the other thing that I did need for a little walk, though, was my keys, which I forgot. So I'm out for a stroll with Bug. It's kind of hot out, so I cut it short. We go home. I realize I cannot get in. I live in a 3-unit building.
And one of the units is a baby.
One of the units is a baby. One of the units is a couple. And then also sometimes a third guy. And I don't know what he's doing there.
Arrest him.
Arrest him. Get him out of here. So I realize I don't have my key. So I start buzzing the other units. No one's home. Bug is looking at me like I'm an idiot. She was like, well, here we are at the door. Open the door. And I was like, you don't understand actually how complicated this is in this moment. We've come across a huge block. I have a neighbor who's like kind of just a guy who is always around. And for some reason, because he just is always there, I was like, well, why wouldn't he just have keys to every apartment on the block? It just felt like it made sense.
He's the block super.
It really feels like he is. So I ring the doorbell next door. He's not home, but his son-in-law is home. And I was like, do you guys have keys to next door? And he was like, yes. And so then he goes to get them. And it turns out he didn't. There were just other keys.
Well, you know, if all the world is a neighbor, then every door is next door. And if you have any set of keys that isn't yours, that is somebody you can't ignore.
That's so true.
I tried to make it a limerick, but I couldn't get there.
I don't even know what a limerick is. I just know that.
Definitely let me know in the DMs how far wrong I was. Just kidding.
I bet you a lot of people in the East Village are working on limericks.
No, a lot of people in England or London or Dublin.
Sure. So anyways, I start on a journey. He has my landlord's number. So he calls my landlord, leaves a message. I decide to go on a hunt for my keys because I have various keys about town. I go to my friend's apartment. I knew she's in Seattle, but I thought maybe her roommates would be home.
That is such a leap.
I thought maybe, and then I was like, well, maybe her roommates could then call her and say, where are Ashley's keys? Then they weren't home. So I go across the street to this bar where she hangs out a lot. And I think maybe the bartenders will be able to call her. And they weren't open yet. And so I couldn't get a hold of anybody. And then I was walking around for hours.
That can't be true.
It was about an hour. It was just over an hour.
And you didn't run into anybody you know? You're the queen of Greenpoint.
I did run into people I know, but
none of them had phones?
None of them had keys to my house.
Yeah, but I think a phone.
I was kind of at a loss for what a phone would do at that point, honestly, because I had tried reaching out to my landlord and what else?
Yeah.
And so then I went home and luckily my landlord was pulling in and he let me in. A journey with almost no conclusion.
You don't often hear a hero's journey with no lessons learned.
Well, the lesson I learned is bring your phone with you when you go places.
You don't often hear a hero's journey where they come out worse than they started.
I think the real lesson would have been bring your keys with you. But I don't know.
This is kind of the Brooklyn version of Winter's Bone.
Yeah. At the end of the day, they say no more bones in the wintertime. Stay jelly.
Did you see that movie?
No.
Okay. If you did, that's our little joke.
So before we get into this week's episode, should we announce a few things?
I would love to tell you guys what's going on. Bam, 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 bam. In case you fast forward through our weeks, which I totally understand, as is your prerogative, but isn't your prerogative is telling us about it. This is your message that...
Announcement. There is fresh merch on the table.
Is that true?
Well, it's like fresh enough. I feel like we keep forgetting to announce it on the main podcast. We made merch for babies. Bug designed a bandana for fellow bugs.
You could be a dog bug, a cat bug, a person bug, a pill bug.
Any bug could be a bug. She collaborated with our designer, Adrian, to make her perfect bandana.
Shout out to @HelloAdrian.
And at bug.com.
Don't go there. I don't know what you'll find. I don't know what kind of sick porn you'll find.
Could be anything, to be honest.
I don't know what kind of bugs are going in what kind of holes, but watch your ass.
And we also still have other merch that we are really proud of and we love so much. We're also going to Australia.
Are we here right now?
No, next week.
Okay. I don't know what day it is.
Next week we're going to Australia and we're going to Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Adelaide, and Brisbane. Some of them are sold out. Some of them are not. So if they're not, check right now and get your tickets because I bet they'll sell out.
As of right now, which is a couple weeks in advance, Melbourne is fully sold out, I'm hearing. Is that true?
Yes.
Sydney is like
on the cusp.
85% sold. So I would hustle your little arses or whatever you say down under. And then we've got Perth, Adelaide, and Brisbane.
I'm so excited.
somebody gave us a recommendation, go for a swim in Perth. So that's on our bucket list.
I would have kept forgetting. I've heard you guys have got swimming.
And for those of you who don't know, a live show is not just a regular episode. It will not be recorded. It will not be posted anywhere. So it's like a once in a lifetime experience. We live it together. We die it together.
Sometimes we get a little saucy.
We do stand up. We read a local essay by a local celebrity. We play games. We catch up with old memoirists. We riff. We talk about hot takes. We just have a boatload of fun.
I can't wait to have that boatload with you. So Dolly Alderton is a journalist, a novelist, and
podcaster. What a lowly
podcaster.
Do you think of a worse type of person?
Oh my God, two bitches telling each other exactly.
With a British accent, exactly.
I loved her podcast. I was very sad when it ended. It was one of the few podcasts I listened to religiously.
Dolly Alderton has very often been our North Star, even though I've never actually listened to that podcast or read anything about her. But I've always been told, you have to understand there's these two girls. We want to be them. And I said, sure.
One time on the High Low show, which was Dolly Alderton's podcast with Pandora Sykes, one time a writer wrote in who was a farmer and said that they named two baby cows after Pandora and Dolly. And when me and Claire started this podcast, I thought to myself, oh, maybe someday someone will name cows after us.
No, she said, our goal is to get cows named after us. And I'm like, that is why we will die unsuccessful.
I don't care about anything other than the cows named after us. We've traveled abroad together. We're going to Australia on tour, but not one fucking cow gives a shit that we exist. And I hate that about our lives.
There's no cow birthsake, namesake.
Yeah. We're such fucking losers. Oh my God.
Oh, I know that. You don't have to tell me you think I wake up every day proud of us. No. No.
Okay. Well, if you're out here listening to this on the farm, you could save us. You could save everything. Okay. So this book is called Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. And on the front, it's crossed out everything I know about parties, dates, friends, jobs, life, love.
Okay. Do you want to talk about why you've said that?
Yeah, I think it's important that this book is like very much about not knowing about anything and then coming to conclusions over and over again. And it always like kind of comes back to love.
It's a memoir, but it is told via essays. And it did come out in 2018. I think Dolly is currently 35. She was born in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
She's currently 35. Oh, August 31st, 1988. I read the book and it comes up.
At time of episode, she'll be 36.
Which was 6 years ago, and she's 30 upon writing.
Yes.
Okay, now the math is adding up. You know me, I'm a stickler for the numbers.
Yeah, we love math here at this podcast.
You know who else loves math?
Pitbull.
Yes! We just saw Pitbull live 2 days ago, and I have to tell you, so many of his lyrics, so many of his songs have the lyrics 2 + 2.
I'ma undress you.
Yeah.
He says it again, though, a lot. Anyway, so this book constantly comes back to a common thread essay, Everything I Know About Love as blank. A teenager, a 26-year-old, a 28-year-old, a 30-year-old. There are a bunch of different Everything I Know About Loves. And so when it starts out, it's everything she knew about love as a teenager, which obviously is not a lot.
Do you want to run through a couple examples of what it is that she thought about love?
Romantic love is the most important and exciting thing in the world. If you don't have it when you're a proper grown-up, then you have failed. Just like an art teacher.
You can snog as many people as you like, and that's fine. It doesn't mean anything. It's just practice, which is true.
When I have a boyfriend, little else will matter.
So she starts with the essay Boys, and I will be frank, I had a hard time getting into this book. I came in primed to love it. I was like, I'm going to have my own life reflected back at me. And I did in a way that I went, yeah, I know, I lived. And I'm curious, I wonder why like some essays hit for me really hard and some didn't. And I think it took a couple. And I think it's because
I think there are some essays that you were quite far past your need for them.
But I also think like sometimes like this first one's called Boys, and it's about growing up talking to boys on AOL Instant Messenger, which was exactly my childhood. I remember distinctly 7th grade when I was finally allowed to have a screen name. My first ever screen name was Florida Lover. Why? I don't know.
Mine was Dancing Girl 66.
Well, you danced, right?
Yeah.
When did I ever love Florida?
I guess when you made the AOL account.
And that's hard to be forced to reconcile. That at some point I thought, well, how would I define myself? By my love of Florida. We only ever went to visit my grandma, and she lived in an old folks home. I guess I like...
You loved it. You said someday I hope I live here.
when I finally got a screen name, I remember in 7th grade, I had a babysitter, Julie. Shout out to Julie. And I was like home on the family computer, calling all my friends one by one and saying, log on so we can talk, and then hanging up. And I distinctly remember saying, life does not get better than this. Like, I was like, this is it. All of my friends are right here and we're chatting. I got the TV on in the background. I'm eating pizza and I could not have a better night than I'm having right now. I really was like, I hope this isn't the rest of my life.
I loved going on AOL Instant Messenger. I remember getting a computer in my room when I was in middle school and having internet on it. And I remember my like uncle being like, the computer in your room has internet? That's crazy. Like, you shouldn't have that. Because for a while, like my whole family obviously shared a computer in the living room. And it is like, it's just hard to be on AOL Instant Messenger then. Yeah. You're having a hard time. People are looking over your shoulder.
POS. I remember I got into a huge fight with my parents because I thought I was calling them pieces of shit.
No, parent over shoulder, duh.
And they were like, we know what you're saying. And I was kind of like, okay, it's slang, but I am like, I'm allowed to say you're over my shoulder. And they're like, you're calling us pieces of shit every time we walk in the house. And I was like, oh, whoa. No.
There's been a huge misunderstanding.
That would be pretty aggressive.
Okay, so I remember also how hard it was because you needed to have sound on because you had different sounds.
Yeah, to hear the door opening.
Yeah, but also did you ever assign special sounds?
Of course, my crush.
Yeah, so you assign special sounds to different people so that you can be alerted to them signing on. And if you didn't have the sound on, you don't know who's online. And what if someone's online for like 10 minutes and they haven't messaged you yet and you like don't know that they're mad at you?
Do you remember when like screening your aims kind of became a big thing where you'd put up a away message even if you were right there?
Oh, yeah.
I remember I had an older cousin who I was obsessed with and I would always steal her AIM profile. Like you could have like a bio in your account. And she had this quote. It said, love is giving somebody the ability to destroy you, but trusting them not to. And then it said, it says who I like if you can figure it out. And so I stole that from her verbatim. And then at the bottom of my profile, I would put my crush in invisible ink, like in white on white ink.
Yeah. So then if someone highlighted it.
Yeah. Because it says who I like if you can figure it out. And it wasn't until I remember like years later being like, oh, she meant like metaphorically. She didn't literally mean that if like you put lemon juice on my AIM profile, the ink will dry visible. Like I think you were supposed to be like, oh, who has the power to destroy her?
I was really using song lyrics. I was really throwing down some song lyrics in my AIM away messages with elaborate designs that I would copy paste from the internet.
Good. HTML heroes.
Yeah. So, we were all having a nice time. We were all having crushes. I remember getting asked to a dance on AIM. They said, do you want to go to the homecoming dance with me? And I said, sure. And then I saved the conversation.
Good. So did she. She grew up in North London, which she says is like a vacuum for culture because it's too suburban to be downtown, but it's too suburban to then be rural. She's like, it was just shag carpet and it sucked. She finally meets some friends though, and they can all be obsessed with boys together. And she finally meets a friend that I was like, okay, this is crazy. She said, early on in our friendship, we discovered that since the conception of Instant Messenger, we had both been copying and pasting our conversations with boys onto a Microsoft Word document, printing them out, and putting the pages in a ring binder folder to read before bed like an erotic novel. Did you ever do that? No. Sometimes I read things where girls are like, okay, you know what we were all secretly doing? And I was like, oh no, I was much more normal than you guys.
I saved conversations that I thought were important, but I was not printing them.
A 3-ring binder. I can get a printer to work to this day.
She also meets a girl named Farley and they become best palios, not instantly. They're kind of friends/acquaintances. And then a couple months in, they kind of like vacuum sealed together as best friends for life.
To this day. So she finally gets to go to a boarding school for the last 2 years of high school. As it turns out, I discovered I had absolutely nothing in common with most boys and next to no interest in them unless I wanted to kiss them. And no boy I wanted to kiss me. So I might as well have stayed in Stanmore and continued to enjoy a series of fantasy relationships played out in the feckin' lands of my imagination.
She also does say, though, that her friend who stayed at the all-girls school then went to college and became like a psycho for men for about a year. And she's like, I don't know. I guess it was good that I met boys before college.
Yeah, you should get some practice.
I blame my expectations for love on 2 things. The first is that I'm a child of parents who are almost embarrassingly infatuated with each other. And the second is the films I watched in my formative years. This is all very, relatable.
I always thought my fascination and obsession with the opposite sex would cool down when I left school and life began, but little did I know I would be just as clueless about how to be with them in my late 20s as when I first logged on to MSN Messengers. Boys were a problem, one that would take me 15 years to fix.
Do you think it's fixed?
No, but I don't know her. I haven't been on a date with her as a man recently, so who am I to say?
That's so true.
So all of this book is like broken up into essays, and then there are some inserts that are like, there's a couple listicles, there's a couple recipes, there's a couple like running joke email style. Those I was not obsessed with. I understand it's a product of its time, 2018, written in 2017. How could you put out a book without a list? They thought it couldn't be done. They said you'd sooner put out a book with no words than a book with no list.
They say open any book you've ever read and tell me if you would have bought it with no lists.
It's hard to imagine. We've come so far as a society.
So there's like a couple different types of inserts. There's lists, there's recipes, there's emails.
There's like a bad date series, and then there's like
a bad party series.
And I think that that's why I struggled with this book at first, because it really lacked arc. And I think the minute I got into the back half, where even though they were still done in like thematic episodes as opposed to chronological storytelling, there was an overarching theme of getting older, finding yourself, what happens in your 20s that I was able to follow and get engrossed in and be interested by and relate to. But I think when I was just like, okay, yeah, you were on AIM, me too. There was something where I was like, it's not bringing me down the nostalgia pipeline the way I think it should.
I guess the thing is, what she actually reflects on later is that she is someone who is cartoonishly nostalgic.
Yeah.
And the problem is that the early chapters, because she's so far removed from them and it feels like the effects of childhood AOL messaging, even though of course she's still dating and trying to figure out boys, like most of the things she's talking about in these early chapters of like really trying to establish her life are pretty irrelevant to her current life.
You know, she has the background of being a dating columnist. She's written columns on a lot of things. And she's the type of first person columnist that's like, what's the story? Okay, I'll go experience it and come back and talk to you. So she can talk about any topic, but that doesn't necessarily mean she has something to say.
I feel like the first half of this book is reminiscing for reminiscing's sake.
Yes.
With a bit of groundwork being laid,
yes.
Tiny bits of groundwork. And so it makes it a little bit harder to read, whereas the back half of the book is the interesting and thoughtful experience of a professional, yes. independent lady. Woman entering her 30s.
I think that's exactly what it is. And I think biasedly, because I am in a profession where people are constantly up there just like make an anecdote set of leftovers, I have a high bar for like why I need to hear about your particular bad date, why I need to hear about your particular bad party. There's some things that I'm like, I'm sure your friends find that very funny. I need more.
It's what we come for people like Seth Rogen about, where it's just like,
yeah, that's so crazy. You spent how much on a cab? Whoa, that's gotta hurt your pockets the next day.
You got how high? Oh my God.
The drug dealer was disorganized? What? Uh-oh.
Yeah, but then as she gets closer and closer to her current life, kind of the opposite of most of the memoirs we've ever read, because the thing that's interesting about her is her 20s.
Yes, that's her specialty.
And that's her specialty. And that's what she's good at talking about in a way that I personally think really good for a lot of women to read. But her early life, who cares? I mean, it's entertaining, I guess, if you're looking for entertainment.
No, I think it'd be cute. And I also think if I was a couple years younger, this book would have really hit different for me. There is something where I think I'm the exact age she was, more or less, when she wrote it. And we've both come to similar conclusions. It's not lectury at all, but there's definitely the sense of, have you ever thought about these mundane things and just like let yourself let go? And I'm like, yeah, I have.
I think I first read this book maybe like 3 years ago, mm-hmm. because I remember my conclusion being, you don't have to have experienced a lot of things to write a good book. It was like kind of before a lot of the topics in this book were conversations I was having that I was seeing happen in public more often or like on the internet more often. So I think a lot of the essays, and especially the back half of this book, it was kind of the first time I'd seen these topics discussed in a way that was like serious.
I guess I'm feeling like every day more and more like, I don't know, if this is your favorite book, I believe you and you're correct. And if you hate this book, I believe you and you are correct. I like read this book and I understand how if it hits you at a moment when you need it, it's so helpful and good. And there's nothing in it that I like disagree with or find fucked up at all. I also think at this exact moment in my life,
you personally don't need it.
It felt very much to me like delving in on topics that I feel very much like I have a bow on and I'm good. I'm kind of done looking at my 20s and wondering what went wrong there or forgiving myself. I'm kind of like not in the mood to be like 26-year-olds. So if you haven't accomplished it yet, then when you're dead, I'm kind of like, well, I actually feel much younger now than I did then. I feel much happier now than I did then.
I think I was reading this book going into the summer that everyone I knew was getting married.
No, and that's what I was saying is I really understand how this could be there for you. And I think different than other books where I am like, I don't know, at your worst, don't turn to this guy. I like totally get it. I could see why somebody would love it.
Mm-hmm.
And there were parts I loved.
I think if you're 28, I highly recommend.
Yeah. And like, actually, it's so funny. The parts of her life that diverged a lot from mine were the ones I was most interested in because I think so much of our story was so similar that I felt very like, I'm not a nostalgic person and I'm not ready yet to be nostalgic. It felt very much like picking at old scabs.
Yeah. Okay, so the first Bad Party Chronicle, New Year's Eve 2006. We're at a New Year's Eve party. She and her friends are kind of just like moving through the party, finding people to make out with and potentially go home with. And I think it's just kind of an interesting, again, nostalgic reminder of college era parties where you're just kind of like moving through the room, making out with people in corners. It's something I haven't thought about in a long time because it sounds crazy when you read it. And then you're just like, oh my God, boy, oh boy, were we doing that?
I guess. I wonder if I was.
I was. Let me tell you what.
I feel like I was always making out, but I feel like I'm pretty that one. I had a strong rule growing up that you get like one per friend group. And I really tried to stick to it.
Okay, I really tried to stick to it. And then I would go to these parties. I remember it happened to me twice where I would go to a party and make out with someone. And then we would just kind of like go our separate ways. And I would make out with someone else. Then like the next day I would find out those two people had been roommates.
That's so funny. I don't think I ever went to a big enough school.
Yeah.
Frats at my college were brownstones. So you were at most 12 feet away. You know what I mean? It was very narrow brownstones.
Yeah, I was in Syracuse in weird dark basements that were so sticky.
Oh no, we had sticky ass basements. Then I remember the one I went to, they like purposefully painted the steps black so that in the dark you couldn't see where you were going and people would fall down all the time. And like, what kind of sick prank?
That's really mean.
It really was. So she talks about the first time she ever got drunk. She was 10 at a bat mitzvah, which feels young to be at a bat mitzvah. But for some reason, they were serving all the kids alcohol. At first, it felt just like a wave of warmth rushing through my body, my blood sprinting, my epidermis humming. Then, like all the screws and all my joints had been loosened, leaving me as springy and light as just proved dough. And then came the chatting, the funny stories, the dramatic impressions of teacher and parents, and the rude jokes and the swear words.
I had, at far too young an age, got the taste for alcohol. I begged for small diluted glasses of wine at my family event. I'd slurp the sweet, throat-catching syrup from the bellies of the liquor chocolates at Christmas in the hope of a hit. I felt very stressed out by her alcohol consumption.
I guess I've heard this exact experience as being like a young child drinking alcohol, and like the people who similarly feel whole for the first time are like Matthew Perry was one. I'm trying to think who else, but it's always very much
people with addiction.
People who grow up to have pretty serious addiction problems. And I will say her drinking in this book, there's like an awareness at some point that she's like, okay, I'm probably drinking more than anybody else here always. It's never, I don't think everything has to be labeled, and it seems like she's dialed it back in a way that's healthy and helpful for her. But I do think
it's stressful.
It's interesting because I don't think that that's a common experience, or I don't think it's a universal experience. I think it's a common one. And the people who have it in common are people who should probably be a bit more aware of their relationship to alcohol.
Yeah, there are definitely instances where her alcohol consumption is like intense.
And I wonder if she knows that.
Yeah.
I think later she's like, oh yeah, she recognizes that she was like one of the bigger partiers in her friend group. But like, I wonder if she knows not all 10-year-olds take their first sip of alcohol and they're like, I love that. A lot of 10-year-olds, I think, are like, oh, that tastes gross.
Yeah, like I don't want to sound judgy, but I do feel that like at one point when her friend is like, I am worried about you, it gets quite brushed off. And again, like you said, now she seems a lot more in control, but I also don't know her, so.
Alcohol, I think, was my small act of independence. It was the one way I could feel like an adult. She is obsessed with becoming an adult. That's her whole thing all through her childhood, her teenage years. She was 6 foot pretty early on, and I think she just felt so stuck in her small town. And the thing that was very important to her as a teenager was one day getting to pay her own bills and have her own flat and live her own life and like I think alcohol was one of the ways she got to feel like a grown-up.
I do feel that this was very relatable to me. There is like a feeling that I think, like you said, is not rare, but is not universal, where just in your teenage years, you feel so stuck and powerless because you're just like, I don't know, my life hasn't started yet. I felt very distinctly throughout high school that I was in like a holding cell and I wasn't allowed to do anything. And not even like I had a particularly sheltered experience. Like it was a little bit sheltered, but it was whatever. I just felt like, okay, nothing that I like actually want to try is on the table for me right now because I'm not a legal adult.
There's such a funny idea of like what an experience is, I think, when you're a teenager.
Yeah.
I think when you're a teenager, you have this idea of like experiences and I want to experience things. All of life is just waking up every day and talking to the people near you.
I think I've always had a problem with like having to answer to someone.
Oh, yeah, you're a big authority girl.
A big anti-authority girl. I don't want that to sound narkish.
No, you love authority. You love falling in line.
Boss. Give me a boss. Tell me what to do, boss. I felt very like stuck in high school because you could never go anywhere without people knowing about it. And I remember that being like a very specifically suffocating feeling for me and being so happy to be in college where you could just like go anywhere and nobody ever had to know. She says the one good thing about her adolescence is making friends.
She has a lot of friends that she made in high school and then she like adds to them in college. And I guess then she added to them in adulthood. But the bulk of this book is about kind of that core group of girls who seems to go on to live with each other
for a while.
Yeah. I love that. I really respect that. I aspire to be that way of like all of my friends will be friends with each other. And now we're all a group and we all hang out and it's everybody I've ever known and loved.
I do think that there is hope of a senior citizens commune at some point.
I think we got to get to Europe.
I do too.
I think the move is you go to Tuscany and you buy a bunch of little farmhouses that are only like 50,000 euro each.
Yeah.
And then we get bikes.
Ugh.
That's the dream. She says here, university is never going to be an ideal place for someone with an unhealthy relationship with booze. But my God, I chose the worst one imaginable the day I submitted an application to Exeter. So she goes to this place called Exeter. One of the things that was quite eye-opening for me was how much like inside England info was in this book.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff where I think like naming the neighborhood, naming the place, naming the car, naming the band was supposed to like signify everything it needed to signify. And I was like, I don't know what the fuck you guys are talking about. And I was like, I wonder if that's how people feel listening to me. I'm so like, you know that one else stop in Bushwick? Yeah. Need I say more? I think we all know about that fucking Halsey L stop. I'm like, it was about as nice as that Thai restaurant I go to all the time. And people were like, well, that could be great or bad.
Could mean anything. It was a time of heightened eccentric debauchery, a world where two of my friends stayed up all night dancing before heading to Exeter Cathedral for Sunday service. We were the worst type of students imaginable. We were reckless and self-absorbed and childish and violently carefree. She really romanticizes being a fucking mess. It's sweet.
And she says, now I cross roads and get off tubes to stop early to avoid being in the direct vicinity of the exact type of noisy, silly, self-centered exhibitionists that we were.
I think that's so specific to being like a young girl in love with your friends.
Yeah. There's such a narcissism. I mean, it's you and me at a restaurant being like, well, everybody wants to hear our convo, right?
Doesn't everyone think our convo is so funny?
They're getting a free extra podcast app.
We should talk louder so that the people in the back can laugh.
She tells a lot of stories that I think are interesting in the sense of like, they paint a picture. And I think, of course, we have a lot of like, in your face, here's my sexuality, here's who I fuck. There's a lot of women out there who will talk about sex graphically, who will talk about drinking in extremes. And then there's a lot of women who will be prissy or whatever. But I think she's this middle ground of just like you, the girls you knew, the girls you went to school with, and describing it. I think because she's so normal and so not trying to be shock jockey about it, it actually comes off much more shocking and kind of like barrier breaking for me. I think the way Lena Dunham talks about sex and her body felt to me so just dishonest and inauthentic and not that shocking because you could feel the way she wanted to be like, oh yeah, I put lint up my pussy once. Now what? And you're like, I don't know, man. Why'd you do that?
Wish you hadn't. Remember when she talks about her boyfriend's pants like a bog man? No, but this book is very to the point about sexual debauchery in a way where you're like, you were out there fucking.
Good for you. Weren't we all? I think almost like 5 years ago or in 15 years, I would have had a lot more fun with these.
Yeah.
I don't need to be nostalgic about my college years right now. And I don't need to be seen, like, quote unquote. Like, I don't need to feel less alone. I'm just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, man. For 4 years, we were goofs.
I guess that's true, is this book does feel like kind of the more honest version of everything Lena Dunham was trying to make you gasp about.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think this would have been very helpful to me in a post-college years, whereas girls I like rejected outright during my post-college years because it felt just dialed up enough that I was like, how dare you fucking call me that, Lena? And even though that wasn't about me at all. And now it's the reverse. I can like ruefully watch girls and be like, oh, this is fun and silly and goofy, where this is, I'm like, true and reasonable. Why are we having such a reasonable conversation?
So then there's another bad Party Chronicle. For New Year's Eve, they have no plans and they just start texting everyone on their phones. Farley is quite reasonable, the best friend, and she's like, I don't know that we need to go out, but Dolly has a crush on this guy, so they go to his party, and it turns out to really barely be a party at all.
It's like the kids younger than them from her high school. And one of the girls goes, don't you have your own friends to hang out with tonight? And I'm like, if someone said that to me, I would be more than the ball would be dropping. You know what I mean? It'd be me flung off a
Bitches would
roof.
hit the floor. Oh. Anyway, so then she goes to this party to flirt with this guy, and Farley is game to come with her. And it turns out the guy has a crush on Farley, not Dolly. I think that this is just like one of those lessons that everyone has to learn at some point. You never make plans around a guy. It's very cancel my plans just in case you call, back when I was living for the hope of it all.
Yeah.
Like, you have to learn the lesson. And I think it's just a thing every girl figures out, that you can't make plans around a non-committal fella.
My big lesson, and this is specific to New York City comedy, I had to learn the hard way after years and years. You never take an Uber or a cab to a comedy show. You will actually never be later than a comedy show start time.
Yeah.
You could be 4 hours late. You'll
Still
get
hasn't
there and they'll
started.
be like, we're waiting for a couple more people to trickle in and I think we'll get started in about 15 minutes. You want to go eighth? You'll be like, okay.
Good idea.
Yeah, you just want me to hang out for another 74 minutes before my 6-minute spot? Totally worth it. I'm glad I spent $17 in the cab.
So then there's another one of these email inserts from a person she hates. She writes these heightened versions of like invites to events like spoken word poetry or wedding showers or baby showers and things like that. And I think that in 2018, they could have been funny. And now they're like, I don't know, it just feels like, why do you hate your friends? I feel that we are reading it at a time when this concept of people asking you to attend their destination wedding is the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone. That conversation is tired. Go to the wedding or don't.
No, it's so funny. So the very first one is inviting people you do or don't know to your spoken poetry night, where someone's going to show their 4-minute short film and then talk about it for 3 hours. And there'll be craft beer and we think we're so smart, blah, blah, blah. And I thought that it was her parodying herself.
Yeah.
Because I know that she was in bands and it sounds like she did do some like sketch comedy. And so I was like down with it. And then when the next one was inviting people to like a baby shower and a dinner party and a wedding, I was like, wait a minute. And I realized these were all making fun of women who would kind of out of touch and ungroundedly invite you to things you don't want to go to. And they really were the only sour note for me in this book because it felt so dishonest, because the whole premise of this book is that she has this group of like 10 friends that she has known her whole life and just like would die for. And they're all phenomenal. And they all have friends that are phenomenal. And like everything she knows about love, she's learned from the women in her life. And they're all these great gals and they keep moving through different stages of their life, but they keep fighting to stay close. So to have like all of these archetypes of horrible women that are inviting you to things, and I'm like, well, who are the women that you hate that are inviting you things? Because I thought you liked all your friends. I thought that was the whole point, that aren't friends great?
Yeah.
I do think now that's the problem with almost all comedy, is it all becomes topical in some way. This idea of making fun of somebody for their silly little wedding invite. You're just like, yeah, easy targets.
Yeah. I want to give her credit because I bet you when this came out, it felt a little bit more
like nobody had ever thought to say like a bride does not deserve 17 weekends of your year.
Yes. But now a lot of people are saying it. And so it aged. It's the only part of this book, because I think a lot of the other parts of this book feel quite timeless, or at least stay relatable. But those parts I'm just like, oof, well, can't win them all.
It is just so funny to me reading all of these memoirs that we have, the way comedy ages.
Yeah.
It is really, really hard to write a bit that's funny forever. I guess unless you fucking slip on a banana peel, and even that has to be kind of jokes on you. Like that has to be God's best bit.
So this next chapter is called Being a Bit Fat, Being a Bit Thin. And it's about developing an eating disorder, which I try not to really talk about eating disorders on here because I don't know that I do it well.
Yeah.
But this is a chapter that I think best represents my experience out of anything I've ever read.
So basically, she meets a boyfriend in college. They're not right for each other.
It's just like having a boyfriend. It doesn't matter if he's good or bad. You just like need one.
We had absolutely nothing in common, but he wanted to be my first proper boyfriend. And when I was 19, that was a good enough reason to go out with someone. Something she says later in the book that I think ties back to here is she talks about like what she does and doesn't know about romantic relationships based on her experience. And one of the things she says she doesn't know is what it feels like to have a romantic partner that is your teammate.
Yeah.
Someone you can rely on. And that was such an interesting like phrase to me that I was like, oh, yeah, I've definitely had like serious boyfriends before. My current relationship is probably the first time I've felt like in a team.
And that's why I think you guys are married.
Yeah.
Because I feel that way, the way Dolly feels, where I've had relationships. I don't think I've ever had a boyfriend that I wasn't like a little bit self-conscious with or like a little bit.
There was a little bit of like it's us against each other. Like we're duking it out to something and I'm not really sure what. She's like, I was in love with them, but I wasn't like safe and home and comfortable with them.
The way you talk about with Mac being in a relationship where you're like, even if I'm wrong, he just like has my back. Even when he is like, you're kind of wrong for this, he delivers it home in a very supportive way because he's always going to be on your team. And sometimes like being on your team means being like, can I level with you for the team us to win? But like, I do feel that I have never been in a relationship where I like believe someone has my back. I mean, you, I believe, has my back, but like a romantic relationship.
The only person I'd let fight with you is me.
But I don't think that I've ever been in a relationship where I'm like, oh yeah, if I walk out of this room and someone says something obnoxious about me, what would you say? Would you roll your eyes a little bit? Would you be like, yeah? You know what I mean?
So she dates him and then they break up over the phone after they had been kind of living together for a year, both at school. And then it seems like over summer vacation when he moved in with her and her parents.
And then he dumps her over the phone, which is uncool.
You can't be eating someone's mom's lasagna, spaghetti heavy on your sweatshirt or whatever for months and then break up with someone on the phone. I actually think you should only move in with someone's parents if you think you're going to marry them.
Oh, me too.
It's one thing to live together and not make it. It's another thing to live with their parents. And
also,
not make it.
Pandemic notwithstanding. I think a lot of people lived with people's parents and that was just a weird sitch.
Pandemic notwithstanding, but I do think that you can't just be like, oh, I have an internship in London. Should I stay with your mom? No.
So he breaks up with her over the phone. I couldn't eat. I've heard about this being an upshot of a breakup before, but I never imagined it would affect me. I was and have always been a very hungry girl. Perhaps the hungriest of all. So she talks a lot about having never really had body image issues before. I was aware that I was bigger than my friends and was sometimes called fat, but I always had faith my shape would make more sense when I wasn't a kid. I know that I'm not that tall and I make being tall kind of a part of my identity. And it's because I always felt bigger than people I was friends with. I had like 2 friends that were tall. I feel like when you're 15 and being picked at a school dance is very important to you, being 5'8" around people that are 5'0" is like a weirdly difficult experience.
I mean, comparing an adult body to a prepubescent body.
Yes.
I remember like my freshman year of high school going and there was like these super tiny girls and for some reason, and now that I look back on it, not for some reason, because this is how they were raised and this is how they continue to be to this day. They were like talking to everybody how much everyone weighed. And I remember like lying down about my weight and then being like, that can't be right. Your doctor must have messed up. You must have been wearing shoes. And me being like, oh my God, I can't believe this weight that I just like made up
is still like bigger than what they'll accept.
I remember telling my 5th grade best friend about my bedtime having lied up and she goes, that's really early. I was like, what the fuck?
When will I get it right?
It's just always crazy when you're like already lying and you're still dead wrong. And you're like, okay, I was really playing the wrong sport here.
Yeah. So Dolly is 6 feet tall. You and I are both on the taller end for women.
Thank you.
I think there is something.
Do you hear that, Dad? I am tall.
There's something a bit difficult about being middle school and high school and being a taller girl. And like, I don't know if this was for you, but you feel towering.
I mean, get that big girl off the field. I had adult men screaming that at me because I have an October birthday. Like, I went through puberty at a great appropriate time, but I was always in like leagues down. So I remember I was 12 years old, like the size I am now, playing soccer against 9-year-old boys. And I would run down the field and they would just like fall off me like flies. Okay. Like flies to a windshield. And the dads would just scream, "That girl's too big. Get that big girl off the field." And I would cry. Do you know what it's like to have a dad, an adult man, furious that you're so fucking big at 11 years old?
And again, okay, I want to state really quick, there is nothing wrong with being a bigger person in your friend group.
Have adults tell you that you're the wrong size when you are growing and changing will really get in your head and fuck you up.
And that's the thing that I want to say is like, obviously our society values certain aspects and like, obviously women are expected to be small. I think that's wrong. It's just what we're told and yelled at about. I like understand where she stood here. And then this is another thing I related to. So she stops eating because she's sad. And then everyone is obsessed with how good she looks.
Yeah.
And people are complimenting her all the time and everyone is proud of her. And it is really easy in that moment to be like, oh, well, how much less can I eat? And so she becomes obsessed with not eating and loses a lot of weight. And a lot of people tell her how good she looks. And then she gets to a point where she's not living her life anymore. She's only not eating. And she's like not really able to engage with her friends in a normal way because she's exhausted and foggy headed. And then she gets a new boyfriend who doesn't care that much about her body.
Well, that's not entirely true. He has a particular aesthetic that he prefers in women, which is like very countercultural. He really likes the idea of her with like a shaved head. He doesn't like it when she wears makeup. He doesn't want her to be starving herself because he's like enlightened. And although this is much healthier, it's much healthier to be with a man who
doesn't need you to starve yourself.
Who would prefer you don't try to fit yourself into society's standard. She was still following his preference for how she looked.
Right.
There is a way of like being for yourself that's ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. When you are obsessed with like not eating, it's kind of the only thing you can do. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes being presented with a choice, like you have to pick this or that, is a way that you can jog yourself out of it a bit. And she chooses a boy, which like obviously you should do things for yourself. That's just not always the reality. And I found this like kind of sad and relatable and true that yes, you can choose something else. And yes, you can say like, okay, this is no way to live, but you can never like fully shake it once you've indulged in this path because now you know too much. And like now you've changed your relationship with food forever.
A woman can never really be thin enough. That's the problem. It's not seen as too high a price to pay to be hungry all the time or to restrict an entire food group or to spend 4 nights a week in a fitness first gym. To be an empirically attractive young man, you just have to have a nice smile, an average body type, give or take a stone, a bit of hair, and be wearing an all-right sweater. To be a desirable woman, well, the sky's the limit. And I really think that that is something that I'm feeling right now with like the normalization of like injectables and plastic surgery. And I feel like when perfect is on the table, it will never end. And I think it's such a slippery slope that women have to be careful. Like, what is the goal here? Like, listen, if there's something about your face that you have hated your whole fucking life and you're like, it would bring me a lot more confidence if I could just stop thinking about this tooth or this nose or my ears or my acne or whatever. I get it. But I do think right now there's like this moral imperative
that you must
be pursuing perfection.
Yeah.
That everything can be more asymmetrical, that everything can be, your hair could be fuller, your face can be tighter and plumper. You should have no buccal fat, but also like high elasticity, lots of effort, but no effort, and high maintenance to be low maintenance, which is still just like doing more expensive maintenance all the time. I mean, it's just, there is no, I don't like this part of me. It's everything about you can be perfected. And if you're not, like, why? Why aren't you optimizing? Why aren't you habit stacking? And no one can be perfect. So it's kind of a fucked game to try and play.
I mean, there's this normalization of spending hours and hours and hours working on your physical self. And that's just like normal. If you are doing a 48-minute facial massage routine every day, that's like fine.
But it's also hard because it's like, There is no end goal.
Also, if you state an insecurity and there is a solve like a 45-minute facial massage routine, you not only could be doing it, but you should be, because it's so easy to fix that thing you don't like.
I almost feel like it's not even about fixing that thing you don't like.
Yeah.
It's about, well, here's what a perfect face is. How much do you fit into like the Michelangelo idea of symmetry? Like the way that everyone's like, well, how are your arms? Are they Pilates arms? And you're like, no, but I never thought about them. They're like, well, start thinking and start doing Pilates. And also, how is your butt? And also, how are your boobs? And also, there's this new line Emily Ratajkowski invented. Do you have it? Here's like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Actually, Bug has it.
Well, of course, Bug has a perfect model body. She's Cara Delevingne. But it's no longer fixing problem areas. It's every aspect of you should always be working towards optimization.
Yes.
It could never be good enough. And that's what I think she gets here. Like, it'll never be good enough. There's never a weight that you can reach where you can now sit at that weight.
Yeah.
You have to be toning every aspect of your body. And then once you tone it, it needs to be lifted a little bit more. And then it's insane.
Yeah. Everything she knows about love at 21, oh boy, does it suck. Except for this one. A breakup will never be as hard as the first one. That's kind of true.
Don't go out with someone who won't let you get drunk and flirt with other people. If that's part of your identity, they should take you for who you are.
Sure.
Orgasms are easy to fake and make both parties feel better. Do a good deed today. You'll feel settled, centered, and calm when you fall in love with the right man.
Ugh, God, I'm so glad to not be a 21-year-old. Your brains are fucking wild.
And now she gets into, I guess,
the good part of the book.
The good part of the book, because it's more memoir-y and it has a transformation and arc, and it's exciting. There's a bit of a plot here.
It began with a train journey. I always thought something brilliant might happen to me on a train. And then she gets into the part where she goes, actually, this story is barely about me. But one day on a train, they're snowed in. She's stuck on a train. It's snowy. Everything's all fucked up. She makes eye contact with a guy. They split a bottle of wine. They don't exchange numbers.
I decided it would be a serendipitous act if we didn't swap numbers and hope to be reunited again by chance. And off he went into the cold night at Bristol Station, leaving me with enough material to write about my rambling anonymous single girls adventures blog for at least 3 entries.
So 2 years later, they run into each other again on another snowy night, and they begin a torrid affair. It seems just like dirty and sexy for a little bit. One day she stumbles into his kitchen naked and finds out he has a roommate. And then she's so apologetic about it. And then the roommate's like, well, do you have any girls you could set me up with? And she's like, actually, my paleo Farley.
Something I actually think she does so successfully in this book that I think is really incredible and difficult is the way that she is able to paint a man in all the phases of infatuation.
Yes.
From obsession to ick. Because this guy, what's his name? Harley or something? Hector. The way that when she first explains them, you're like, well, this is the most fascinating, interesting man in the whole fucking world. And then by 3 pages later, she's like, he was disgusting. I saw his room. It was actually just like nasty. And he was just like a pervert. He barely called me. And I was so sick of him and his disgusting, god awful poetry. And then he finally made me go to his room one more time. And he picks up a guitar to write me a song. And you're like, oh. And I am like, bravo. I want to give it all the way up to Dolly. Because the way that I was like falling in love with these men, that 2 pages later, I was just like, ugh, how did we fuck him?
Ew, have some respect.
And so she really is great at that, taking you through that experience of being like, wait, if this pans out, this is the most romantic, exciting night of my life. He's so fascinating. He's so sexy. We're doing freaky little things and I like it. I'm at the office thinking about him. There were so many times I was like, oh my God, I cannot wait to see where this goes. And then 2 pages later, I was like, Jesus Christ, leave us alone. So she does that with Hector, which is quite impressive.
So she does introduce Farley to the friend, and they begin an affair that is so adult and not an affair at all. And their first date is Valentine's Day. They start texting. The only day they're both free is Valentine's Day. He takes her out for like a full proper dinner. And Dolly is like, what do you mean you're going to dinner with a random man on Valentine's Day? I thought you're going to like go to my sex dungeon for your own sex. And Farley's like, yeah, we're doing that, but like first dinner. And then, of course, they begin a very serious relationship.
Something that Dolly does in this book that I also think is very interesting, and like why it is such a unique spin on the like messy 20s girl that figures it all out by the end type book, because of course you are in fact reading her book. And that's the truth of every memoir, is that no matter what an underdog you are, no matter what a mess you are, if I am sitting here with your book in my hand, you pulled it together and you found a voice.
Yeah.
Something about her is that she like really speaks to this desire to have experiences and try everything, and everything's a story, and I want to have a life like Sex in the City. And I guess that's what she does.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, she ultimately did get exactly what she wanted out of these years. And I think she looks back at them and there's like not a regret. There's just a one day she had enough and wanted to move on. And it's funny because she really makes you feel that way. You're like, oh my God, well, I can't believe you met that guy. And I can't believe you did that. And it's fun. And that's what she wanted. She wanted to be the girl with the stories.
Yeah. So Farley and Scott start dating. And boy, oh boy, does it get serious. Hector is now a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah. He's married to a Hollywood starlet. If anybody knows who Hector is, I'd be interested.
I would be so interested. So as Scott, the roommate, and Farley get more and more serious, Dolly starts to get very like, wait, what the fuck? What have I done?
Although I had hated watching Farley be treated so badly by stupid teenage boys over the years, being led on, ignored, dumped, I realized that there had been a safety in it. As long as boys weren't taking any serious notice of her, I still had her all to myself. The minute a grown-up man with a brain stopped and took interest in her, I was utterly fucked.
I was the one who'd always had a boy on the scene, and now she was the one with an actual proper older boyfriend.
After about a year of Farley and this guy Scott dating, they go to a party together where Dolly is just like not speaking to her. And she goes up, Farley, and she's like, why are you ignoring me?
And she goes, why are you ignoring me?
She goes, what are you talking about? I texted you yesterday. Oh, yes, texting. Texting you're great at. Texting is your get out of jail free card. That means you don't have to see me for months on end and go to Scott's flat every night. And when anyone asks you about it, you can say, oh, but I text her. I text her every day.
So they have this massive row, as the Brits would say. Row?
I actually have no idea. You know me. I can't even speak in English. I definitely can't speak in Anglaise, which is European English.
I call it Old English. So they have this big old fight that everyone's listening to about Scott. And I found this so ugly and honest.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot of shit on this podcast about people, especially if you listen to Worm to the Wise, about people who are in relationships just to be in relationships, to feel like they've checked off a box. Okay, so I was talking to Claire about this before we started recording. I think I read this book right around the time you were moving in with Mac. And there is something that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about, which is your friend getting serious in a relationship that isn't sucky. Because it feels great, like you're very happy for them, but there is just this side pang of, we were stupid together, and now you're doing something very like adult and serious and proper, and it's not bad. It's just like a notable feeling that I don't think I've read very often.
I would say in this book is bad.
For me, it wasn't bad, but I still feel like this book illustrated it more than I'd ever seen it illustrated.
Well, just like the primary ethos of this podcast is nobody ever talks about how important female friendship is to like developing a sense of self in your teens, 20s, and beyond. And so to like act like those relationships are important at all, or that they could be the main relationship in your life, is so rare, when in reality, for a lot of people, it's so truthful.
It's so truthful. So in this section, she's also trying to find a job. She hasn't had like a proper adult job yet. And she like really doesn't feel like her life has started until she's gotten a job. And finally, she does get a kind of a cool one. She's working as a story producer on the British reality show Made in Chelsea.
She says, I was desperate for a job. It was all I thought about from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep in my childhood bedroom. I yearned for a job in my early 20s with the same hunger as I did for my first boyfriend in my early teens. Obsessing over who I knew who had one, grilling them on the details of how they acquired one, lying in bed night after night, wondering how many more years this could go on for. I like love that. I'm like, it's so true.
Yeah.
I feel like when you're out of college and trying to figure out like a non-conventional path, or even just like a conventional path that's eluding you, I feel like you're just being like, but how did you do it? How did you get to the interview? And then how did you go from the interview to the desk?
How are you working?
And also I think it's so interesting to hear from her, who obviously is so successful and has cobbled together such like an interesting kind of freelance lifestyle that we have followed in the path, and that I am like, man, I don't know when it went from like really not working to doing okay. Like I look back together and I'm like, when did this coalesce? Because let me tell you, there were a lot of years where it wasn't looking so hot.
I mean, there was years when I was stealing money out of a strip club.
Not from strippers.
Not from strippers, from a man who owed me money. He owed me it.
And luckily he had cash on him because he was at the strip club.
And luckily he was drunk enough to tell me which one. Anyway, like, do you know what I mean? Like, there are years when I'm like, what the fuck? To years when I was like desperately emailing manrepeller.com about a job.
I mean, I just feel like, how many summers did you and I have where we were like, well, here we are again, unemployed for the summer? I think I've worked through one summer in my life just because I didn't have many jobs that lasted years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, when I turned around and I was like, okay.
I was wearing ballet flats to Hasbro's studios being like, I'm a professional lady and there's free chips here. And I love that. I loved that.
I got hired for a temp to perm position for $22 an hour. And I literally booked a trip to Thailand. I was like, well, I'm the richest person I know.
So she has a job on Made in Chelsea. Farley, AJ, and Dolly are able to get their very first London flat. And they moved to Camden, which I guess is not cool. It seems like not a lot of other young people live in Camden.
Somebody called Camden So 2007, and I was like, okay, I'll put that in my back pocket for next time I go to England. I'll like lay that out there and see what that means.
Yeah.
And people will go, ugh, oi.
Yo, Giza.
Finger on the pulse. Ashley's going to go to England next year.
Yeah, I think we're both going to go.
Yeah, but you're going for a cool reason.
You're going for a cool reason. And then we also might go together for a third reason. I guess by the time this episode comes out, we'll know whether or not I got Oasis tickets.
Pray for Ashley.
It's really important to me that I do. I know it's important to everybody. I know we're all gunning for the same thing, the entire world population. It's equally important to every single one of us.
So she gets this job Made in Chelsea in like the coolest way possible.
She was blogging and they were like, your blogs are funny.
Not only that, at the end, she said the show needs to fix a couple things. Here are my advices. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Avicii's?
R.I.P.
Is that the plural of advice?
Yeah.
Anyway, and they read it and they were like, she's so right. She's a really good sense on how to make this show better. And in the first ever case of a production company doing right by an unpaid creative, they hired her.
Yeah.
They should have stolen her ideas. No offense.
I think it might still be happening. So I think they needed her advice for the season after too.
One day I'd like to watch the first season for our Patreon.
Me too.
If you're interested in that, let me know. www.patreon.com/Celebrity Memoir Book Club.
She's trying to be a writer on the side and then also working on Made in Chelsea and having this like lovely Camden experience with her gal pals. And she says that they were just having this kind of idyllic era where they were doing crazy shit for each other. Everything that they were doing was to have a story to tell the roommates the next day. I thought that to be a writer, I had to be a collector of experiences. And I thought every experience worth having, every person worth meeting only existed after dark. So she was living fast, partying hard. Eventually, someone gives her the advice because she's writing freelance. She's working on Made in Chelsea and partying constantly. And someone's like, you can't be the hardest partier and the hardest worker. You have to pick. And she kind of realizes, oh, I can party a little bit less and that's like fine.
So she ends up breaking up with this guy, Leo, who was the guy who saved her from her eating disorder, because she really starts investing in herself and she just wasn't around to be his doting girlfriend. He felt a little cheated. He had fallen in love with a rootless girl who wanted nothing but to pack a bag of sneakers and jeans and go on any adventure he took her on, who embroidered his initials into sweaters and spent the entirety of a party locked in the bathroom with him. He ended up with a woman with her own adult identity and a preoccupation with her work.
She also discovers the benefits of partying a little bit less. I would discover that constantly behaving in a way that makes you feel shameful means you will simply not be able to take yourself seriously and your self-esteem will plummet lower and lower. She kind of decides to dedicate herself to her work a little bit more, but she's still having her nights, her debauch.
Whenever I am on a Tuesday night from now on until the day I die, you can be sure that I would prefer to be in a grim pub in Camden drinking beer while talking to a stranger. But I eventually grew out of those clockwork regular blackout benders that wiped out the next day like a tsunami, just like I eventually grew out of the yellow bricked maisonette that was crumbling down. For a short while, though, sitting in my overgrown Garden of Eden, drinking sour Sauvignon with the women I loved, the record player turned up loud and the empty plates piled high by the sink. I thought I lived in the best house in the world, and I still think I did.
She is wistful.
It's funny because this chapter was so long and winding that I think I missed the main point that they had this like shitty little apartment that they fucking loved because it didn't matter what they did, and it encapsulates their early 20s and like how fun it is to be broke with like no responsibilities and nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
I literally have my old address tattooed behind my ear.
Yeah. But there are still just those young things. Like for us, I think the example is being in like the worst basements in the world doing stand-up.
Yeah. And I like love and miss that shit. Like the idea that I used to wait until not 3 a.m., but I would wait till 1 a.m. at the Creek in the Cave to go up and do 2 minutes of stand-up open mic comedy in front of 4 people and like a leak. And then I'd get on the bus and be like, wow, that was 5 hours of my day I dedicated to doing that. Sometimes I would do the math and I'd be like, I've been out here since 5 p.m. It's now 1:30 a.m. That is 8.5 hours I've dedicated to get 9 minutes of stage time. And a lot of times I would go places and I'd be like 4 minutes too late and I couldn't get my name in the bucket, or I'd get there and it turns out it was canceled that week. There'd be days where I'd spend like 4 or 5 hours running around New York City to do open mics and be like, I got to none of them. I didn't get on stage once. I was just on the subway and buses.
Then Farley moves in with Scott. This chapter is called Nothing Will Change, and that's because everything changes.
Farley finally comes clean and is like, I think I'm going to move in. Dolly does not take it well. She's absolutely heartbroken. She feels cheated out of what she had imagined her 20s to be. She says the problem with it is that like you predict this future for both of you guys, and when the other person doesn't live up to your fantasies, you get mad, but you can't really do that. And she says this, which I found so honest, and it's interesting because I just had this conversation with somebody, and for the first time I was on the other side of the conversation. I would like to pause the story a moment to talk about nothing will change. I've heard it said to me repeatedly by women I love during my 20s when they move in with boyfriends, get engaged, move abroad, get married, get pregnant. Nothing will change. It drives me bananas. Everything will change. Everything will change. The love we had for each other stays the same, but the format, the tone, the regularity, the intimacy of our friendship will change forever. I recently had a conversation about this where for the first time, I was the one being accused of changing. And something I felt bad about after the fact was that I was so adamantly like, no, nothing's different. Like, we haven't changed. Like, we haven't grown in different directions. Like, I was so desperate to be like, that's not true. Because I think in a romantic relationship, if you say to somebody, you feel like you're growing apart, or if you feel like you're going in different directions in your life, it means that you have to break up. And I think like I was so afraid of copping to it. But then I felt bad because later I was like, no, of course things have changed. Like I've moved. I've gotten married, and I'm not saying that's a big deal, but I am like, there are a lot of people in my life. There's more people in my life this year than there were 4 or 5 years ago who I feel I like try to give a lot of my attention and care to. My career is so different. For the first time in my life, I'm traveling a lot for work. I just do have less free time than I used to. I have less of a synchronized schedule than I used to. Like things are different in my life, and it was really dishonest of me to pretend that they weren't. On both parties have to admit, things are changing, but that doesn't mean the love has to change. And like to keep that going is so difficult. And that's the hard part of a friendship. And she says it in this book. She says, little did I know how much work it takes to sustain that kind of intimacy with a friend as you get older. And I am somebody who like obviously really wants to preserve my friendships. But I think the first step is admitting that life is changing and will continue to change. And there will never be a phase that will last decades because like priorities just do shift.
And I think that's the hardest part about maintaining friendships is acknowledging that things shift and change and then working to not combat it, but like grow with it.
Yes.
Because listen, you're going to have a baby someday.
Yeah.
Our relationship will change, but it doesn't have to be an ending or anything bad. I think everyone acts like when things change, then like that means they're over. Like you said, growing apart means breaking up. That's not true. You just have to adjust with the changes. Even you getting married and moving to a different part of town. Like,
it changed us, man. We still see each other a lot, but it is different when I can't just like walk over casually for coffee 3 different times a day.
Yeah.
And I think like the longer you're in a friendship, it feels like it should get easier, but it actually gets harder because of like what you take for granted. Mm-hmm. If you have had a best friend for 10 years, you're like, why would it get hard now? We've been in each other's lives so long. That must mean that like we're no longer friends. But actually, the longer you know each other, the more phases you have to learn to adapt to. You have to keep that muscle going. You can never rest on your laurels. But that's a choice you have to like choose to make and be honest about.
Yeah. And I think that that's one thing we see about when people talk about how hard it is to make friends in your 20s and 30s. It's similar to like how a lot of new things, new experiences are harder when you're older because you think the hard part of like having to adjust and discover something new is done. Like you're out of that period of your life and you're not. Like making new friends or maintaining friendships is hard and intentional work. And if you're not willing to do it, you can't have it.
I also think like I really relate to Dolly. I think the hardest thing about your 20s with friendships is when you go to school, you were all on the exact same path. And then your early 20s, you're all fresh out of it, but kind of lost together. And I think watching people find their way and finding out it's a different way than yours is so painful because you never knew it. I think like when you're 21 and the only difference is like majors, you're like, of course, we all have the same goals and we all have the same plans. And then like it turns out you want different things and you're pursuing things at different paces, and like life doles out different obstacles. And it is shocking, and it can be so painful if left unattended or like unspoken.
Yeah, because you find out there is a certain period of time where everyone kind of has the same priorities, which is like graduating college, getting a job, getting settled in your adult life. And then you find out that people have different priorities, which for some people is starting a family, having a career. You find out everyone has a different order of what's important to them. And finding out that someone has maintaining friendships in last place is difficult.
Yes. And it can be really painful when you've like prioritized someone who hasn't prioritized you.
Mm-hmm. And again, she has this moment where she's like, I get that things were going to change, but I didn't think it would be when we were so young.
I was shocked. I mean, Farley is like 23. That to me is really young to move in with your boyfriend. But again, I'm like a fucking city-bred heathen. I've watched it time and time again. A woman always slots into a man's life better than he slots into hers. She will be the one who spends the most time at his flat. She will be the one who makes friends with all his friends and their girlfriends. She will be the one who sends his mother a bunch of flowers on her birthday. Women don't like this rigmarole any more than men do, but they're better at it, so they just get on with it. This means that when a woman my age falls in love with a man, the list of priorities goes from family 1, friends 2, to this. 1, family. 2, boyfriend. 3, boyfriend's family. 4, boyfriend's friends. 5, girlfriends of the boyfriend's friends. 6, friends. Oof. And I think that priorities list is like such a good check of who you can maintain friendships with, because it's one thing to be like, I have a boyfriend and we spend a lot of time together and now we spend less time together. My big friend breakup was with a girl who had that exact priority list where I was like, oh, if it was my birthday and your boyfriend's friend's birthday, you'd be like, sorry, I can't come. It's his really good friend's birthday. And I'd be like, well, I thought I was your really good friend.
Yeah.
And that happened to me. She came to visit New York and we hadn't seen each other in months. And it was just as important to her to like meet his friends and catch up with his friends as it was for us to catch up. And I was like, how could your friends and his friends be equally important to you?
Yeah. Why can't you guys split up and each catch up separately with your own friends?
And I was just like, wow, there's a little bit of your heart left and I'm splitting it with like strangers. That's crazy.
So then they get engaged. Scott, the fiance, puts a lot of effort into kind of including Dolly in the proceedings. And later she's like, oh, planning this post-engagement surprise party was my little task. And she kind of starts to come around to Scott. So this is where I didn't relate. She like really is quite sour on Scott until all of a sudden he feels inevitable. I feel like I related to the sadness of being like, oh, I'm not mad about this person. I'm just like, oh, things do change. And it's okay to like mourn that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
She like really was not happy that Scott existed. She was sad that Farley was moving out, sad that Farley was getting engaged. And then she kind of comes around on Scott. She says, I hate that we've always done stuff at the same time and now we don't. I hate that our children could be so far apart in age. I hate that you're about to buy a flat with a man and I had to beg my landlord to let me pay rent 3 weeks late this month. I found that pretty honest because it's not flattering.
She does a really great job talking about the sadness of like losing a friend. She doesn't bring up as often like the truth of like the societal pressures.
Yeah.
That like in this breakup, not only are you losing a friend, but that friend is being like rewarded by society as having won a game that they think you're losing.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a big piece that's not focused on here. And I like, she's allowed to focus on whatever part she wants to focus on. But I feel like that's also a big piece of it.
Yeah. So she's helping Farley plan the wedding. She's also kind of getting to know Scott's friends and being like, oh my God, you guys don't even suck.
Okay, she has this whole section that I wanted to ask you about because I, as a coupled person, I was like, this isn't what we're doing. She talks about what it's like to be the third wheel. She says, I let them have their fake arguments in front of me about whose turn it is to load or unload the dishwasher. I laugh along when they tell loud stories about each other's sleeping habits. I am silent as they discuss details of people's lives I've never heard of in an overly animated way. And all the while, I pretend I don't know why I am third wheel, why I am doing all the laughing and the listening. But of course, I know I am merely an aphrodisiac in their game of domestic bliss. I know when I leave, they'll rip each other's clothes off, having got all revved up on an extended joint discourse about their holiday in the Philippines, particularly when they both said the same island when I asked them what their favorite bit was. I am just a reluctant audience member.
I have never experienced this. I feel very opposite. I feel that when I'm a third wheel, I don't know. I kind of feel like with us, Mac is the third wheel.
Yeah. I mean, Mac will always send me memes It is like he's listening to the podcast when he hangs out with us. Mac is kind of our audience that we test bits on and we go, we're so funny, huh? And he's like, yeah, you guys are so funny.
Our impartial audience.
Yeah, impartially, he thinks we have the best podcast in the world.
Okay, there are definitely couples. I don't feel like I'm the audience necessarily, but I do feel...
Yeah, you're not like game to laugh along.
But I do feel at times they're like performative or like entertaining me or something like that. But I also feel that I'm not there as strictly an audience. I'm also there as like a single person to entertain them.
Interesting. Yes.
It's never a couple. The part that I don't relate to is that like I'm just there to be the audience as like a pregame for you guys like fucking the shit out of each other.
Like I'm a small distraction in their life of mundanity where like God forbid they talk, they'll find out they don't like each other.
Yeah, I feel more like that.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm gifting them my presence because boy, oh boy, do they have nothing left to say. Like they're not going to rip each other's clothes off when I leave. They're going to be like, how funny was she? And maybe that's my own sexual pregame.
You guys are the warm up. Can I say, and I really do think she is projecting a made up idea. This idea that couples are like, we fell more in love with each other than ever at dinner tonight with our single friend. And now we're like fucking hard. I'm like, I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
I feel like she has a lot of friends who become a couple and then they're only a couple.
Yeah.
Whereas there's also a lot of people who are like, oh, you should meet my husband. He's like a pretty big part of my life and you're my best friend. And you should kind of be aware of him.
Yeah. Anyway, so then the wedding is postponed because Farley's younger sister, Florence, is diagnosed with leukemia. And then kind of everyone's efforts go to supporting Farley as Farley supports her sister.
So she has this series of bad date diaries, and I will just call this one out because it made me laugh and it really felt like something I would do. She goes on a date with this guy on Tinder and he seems pretty wealthy, so he keeps taking her out on nice dates. And then she kind of just like in her own head gets really mad about it and screams, "You can't own me." I shout for no reason in the Mayfair restaurant. He has chosen 3 bottles of wine to the good. I am not a possession for you to own. I won't guilt myself into getting all dressed up just so you can buy me lobster. I can buy it myself. And he's like, okay, buy it yourself. And she goes, I will. I'm not going Dutch the whole thing. And then the bill's 300 pounds. And so she has to go to the bathroom and ask her friend to like lend her 200 pounds.
This one is like a kind of pathetic date story where she goes on a Tinder date with a guy who's visiting London from Seattle. And then she's like, I could be your girl in London. I know you have a girl in every port. And he just never responds.
Ugh. Everything I knew about love at 25. So let's see if she's grown up a little bit. Men love a woman who holds it all back, make them wait 5 dates to have sex with you, 3 dates at the very least.
Oof.
That's how you keep them interested. If a man loves you because you are thin, he's no man at all. If you think you want to break up with someone, but practical matters are getting in the way, this is the test. Imagine you would go into a room and press a big red button that would end your relationship with no fuss. No breakup conversations, no tears, no picking up your things from his house. Would you do it? If the answer is yes, you have to break up with them.
Interesting.
Some women get lucky and some women don't. There are good guys and bad guys. It's sheer luck who you end up with and how you get treated. This I don't really agree with.
Well, she's 25.
Yeah. Fake orgasms will make you feel guilty and terrible, and they're unfair on the guy. Use them sparsely.
True.
Your best friends will abandon you for men. It will be a long and slow goodbye, but make your peace with it and make some new friends.
Okay, so this chapter you had something to say about.
It's called Tottenham Court Road and Ordering Shit Off Amazon. And basically when she was like 23, she's out with this friend she has on her 30th birthday who's having like a nervous breakdown about it. Is this it? Is this all life really is? Fucking Tottenham Court Road and ordering shit off Amazon. They're like, you'll get it when you're not 21. I finally grasped the machinations and subtext of that phrase the year I turned 25. When you begin to wonder if your life is really just waiting for buses on Tottenham Court Road and ordering books you'll never read off Amazon. In short, you are having an existential crisis. You are realizing the mundanity of life. You are finally understanding how little point there is to anything. You are moving out of the realm of fantasy when I grow up and adjusting to the reality that you're there. It's happening. And it wasn't what you thought it might be. You are not who you thought you'd be.
Oh my God, it's like the intro song to Friends.
No one told you life was going to be this way.
Your life's a joke. You're broke.
Your life's DOA.
Dang. They were really on point with that shit. I guess the thing is, this also felt relatable to me where I had this breakdown at like 23 and then you decide what is the thing that you actually want to do or is this something you agree to? And then I started doing stand-up. I was like making paleo pasta and going to run club after work with my boyfriend.
When I hear stories about pre-stand-up Ashley Hamilton, I'm like, who was that?
Spaghetti squash. I thought it tasted good at the time because I was not right.
Sick.
Not
sick in the head.
Right. And so when she's 25, she starts to feel that very similar malaise. And so she has like a meltdown trip to New York.
Mm-hmm. She like quits her job to try to become a full-time freelance writer. She says she's just like has an insane amount of anxiety. She tries to give up alcohol. That makes everything worse because she just like can't stop thinking now. Another friend is moving out to live with her boyfriend. Less than a year after Farley had gone, I was depressed, down a job, and down a flatmate. So she goes to New York City for 2 weeks.
Hates it.
Okay, I was like, fuck you, bitch.
Yeah. Okay, so she was supposed to go with Farley, but this all ends up happening right after Farley's sister is diagnosed. So she's like, I can't go, which makes sense. But Dolly's like, I'm going to have a Sex and the City adventure on my own. So she has no money in her bank account because she's freelancing and one magazine is really late to pay her. And that was the money she was relying on. And so she's just like in New York with no money.
With no money. It's August. It's hot. She doesn't really know anyone. And she was thinking she was going to move here, but she keeps realizing the problem isn't London, it's her.
She has like this horrible sexual experience with a Frenchman.
Where it turns out he like kind of tried to trick her into having a threesome. He was like, oh yeah, I only do group sex. So like, it's cool if my roommate comes, right? And she's like, no. And he's like, no. He just wants to watch or also have sex. And she's like, yeah, no.
Oh, you know New York. You know how New Yorkers are. And then she goes up to the Catskills for a weekend. And then finally she comes back and she meets a guy named Alex on Tinder who is really nice and sweet. And they have this like swept away romance. And he's like, just stay. I'll marry you.
Yeah, they stay up all night talking and they just get each other. And she's like, okay, even I recognize that this is fucking insane. And she's like, no. But they stay close for the rest of their lives. They still get lunch whenever they're in each other's towns.
Yeah, it's kind of cute. And he's like, just stay here. You have nothing waiting for you back home. And she's like, no, the problem is me. So I need to fix myself in England. And then she gets home. And of course, what she has in home is beautiful friendships.
He sees me when he comes to London, and I always have lunch with him when I'm in New York. He reminds me of a tumultuous time in my life, the stories of which I like to remember but never want to recreate. That time when I was 25 and so rootless and lost, I nearly moved country for a man I didn't know. He's got his half of the story and I've got mine. We carry them around like those tacky teenage necklaces of a heart split in two.
I kind of loved that.
Me too. I feel like there are people, and for me, it's a lot of stand-up people where I just look and I go, oh my God.
You remind me of the worst time in my life, and I love ya.
I just feel like sometimes you get out of a situation and you look back and you go, how did I live through that summer? I had no job, no friends. I hated my boyfriend. I hated myself. You're like, I wonder if I knew how bad my life was. I don't even think I realized. Okay, so then she has the story about Florence, and I think it's a really, really beautiful chapter. This was when I really started like coming around to this book, and it was about when Farley found out her sister Florence got sick and the way that they all rallied around Farley. And it's like kind of when she really became accepting of Scott because she saw what a support system he was for her and like what it takes to support a person going through something like this and the concentric circles of grief. Like Farley, as far as Dolly was concerned, of course, like Florence is in the middle because she's been diagnosed with cancer, but then immediate family. And then they have their support systems, but that support system also needs somebody that they can lean on. Like what a village it takes to help people get through difficult times.
Mm-hmm. And how like everyone is just there offering what they can when they can. And that's what it takes.
Her essay about Florence is about what kind of person she was and how amazing she was to know. Even when she was so young as a teenager, she was like so self-assured and had favorite movies and was always like writing her blogs and filming shorts and like yelling at her dad for being a misogynist. And she was such a strong-willed person.
And she was like so interested.
This is really her ode to her. And I think her commitment to keeping her memory alive, which, I mean, Florence tells her sister, like, never forget me. I never want to be forgotten by anyone. I want everyone to know me. And I think Dolly does such a sweet service to her memory by like keeping her memory alive.
Yeah. And I think it's so lovely that this girl now has this ode to her in an international best-selling book. And now we all are able to appreciate the wonderful person she was. She does pass away, if you couldn't tell by the way we're talking about it. And it's really just heartbreaking and sad. And Farley goes into this spiral of grief. You know, I've known people who've gone through horrible things, and it's so devastating to watch someone you love go through something that is unfixable.
She has this line at the funeral. She stopped at a particular line and began to cry. So she passed the poem to the rabbi, who continued to read it aloud. I looked across the crowded kitchen at this small bird-like creature snapping into pieces, all her bones and words crumbling, and I wanted to barge through the room to hold her. It was the worst moment of my life. I feel like in moments like that, you see like, why isn't Dolly socially considered just as important as Scott? Like, I think for like your friend's pain to be the worst moment of your life is such a beautiful testament to like how important friendship is and how much it can be in someone's life.
Yeah.
So when she's 29 years old, she ends up going to a therapist. And for some reason, this is funny, she thought she would never go to a therapist. Like that's not the type of person who goes to a therapist. And I'm like, I don't know, man. An upper middle class white female podcaster, who the fuck else would go to therapy?
Anyway, so she goes to a therapist and she ends up having this very contentious relationship with her therapist where she thinks her therapist is like judging her and mad at her. So she starts skipping sessions.
Well, first she has like a great time and she's like, week by week, I start learning to take accountability. And something her therapist says to her in the very first week is like, you have no sense of self.
Oof.
And she's telling her friends, and her friends are like not that helpful. They're all like, well, that sounds really painful. And if you think therapy is going to make you sad, you shouldn't go. And her other friend is like, no, therapy's not making you sad. You're sad. You're sad right now and your therapist is making you confront it. You're not going to be better off by pretending you're not sad when very clearly you are.
And then she goes through that period where you're like, wait, in order to renovate, I need to gut the whole place. And now I'm at the part where there's nothing here. And wouldn't it have been better if I had just not started?
Yeah. And so she realizes when she says you have no sense of self, she's like, how could that be possible? Because I'm so particular. I have such passions. What does she mean by that? And she says it's like, it's her need to be liked. It's like the anxiety she has about trying to control every situation, to control how everybody feels about her. At first, I was filled with an uncomfortable paranoia, then an almost immediate sense of relief. She was telling me to stop making crap jokes. She was telling me to stop saying sorry for plowing through her Kleenex supply on the table next to me. She was telling me that this was a room where I didn't have to labor over every word and gesture and anecdote to accommodate her in the hope that she would like me. This woman with no sense of self, no self-regard, no self-esteem, a shape-shifting, people-pleasing presence, a tangled knot of anxiety, had been given permission to just be. She was telling me I was safe to let go in this room. And she starts like naming things that she realizes her people-pleasing has done in order to like feel safe and thinking she's being liked. And she talks about like not being able to pay rent because she buys everyone at a bar a shot, even though she doesn't even know them. She talks about like staying out for 15 hours beyond having fun because she needs to show up to everybody's birthday party. Like the way that she allows herself to go to parties and just be like the butt of every joke. And if somebody wants to party, she's there and she'll do drugs even if she didn't plan to. Like the way that she has done everything to be everybody's like good time just so that they like her. And it's like a betrayal to the self. And she has been so splintered by this attempt of being everything to everyone that she's just like empty.
She realizes it's about control and trying to control everyone's opinion of her in controlling them to like her. And so she has to kind of confront what is best for herself and discovering what she needs and what she likes. And in this process, she starts to project a lot of judgment from her therapist because she's judging herself and like she becomes mad at herself. And so she thinks her therapist is mad at her. So she starts skipping sessions. And then she realizes her therapist is like kind of a good therapist. And she realizes I felt steadier. I felt stronger. The doors inside of me unlocked one by one. I emptied the rooms of all my shit and talked through every piece of old toot I found in there. And then I threw everything out. Every room I unlocked, I knew I was getting closer to a sense of self, a sense of calm, and a sense of home. And I also think she has a lot of good reflection about how not everyone needs therapy. Not everyone's going to properly use therapy. But like, if you are going to go, you have to like do some fucking work. It's not like a comfortable and fun experience all the time.
Okay. So she wakes up to 3 missed calls from Farley before 7 a.m. She's freaked out. She's like, oh no, what has happened? It's Scott. I think we're breaking up. It was 8 weeks before their wedding.
This is 18 months after Florence passes.
And she doesn't ever say what it is that happened between them, but Dolly ends up like dropping everything and spending the weekend taking care of Farley while I guess Scott thinks about what he wants to do next. And sure enough, he calls her and is like, yeah, it's over. And Dolly goes into overdrive.
Canceling the wedding.
Yeah. Telling all of her guests the wedding's off, texting all their friends, putting people in place to like always be with her. And they just like jump in and take care of her.
She ends up kind of explaining what she had planned for Farley's hen do. And then instead that weekend, they do a nice little trip with all the girls. They also take her on a little trip on the weekend the wedding would have been on. They really dive in to super support mode.
And she looks over at one point and says like, I'm sorry if I ever made you feel second best. I mean, that's the irony is a lot of times the women are there on both sides of it, you know?
Yeah. And Dolly also has to confront that like she had kind of always wanted Farley and Scott to break up, But then she really came around to Scott, and then she really got comfortable with the idea that Scott would be in her life forever also. And then he was gone.
They end up doing vows to each other, and I think they're really sweet.
Yeah.
Because it's like the day of her wedding, and they're on the beach trying to forget, and they say, well, let's do vows to each other and to ourselves. Dolly vows to not judge however you handle this when we get home. If you want to have a really heavy amphetamine and casual sex phase, that's fine. If you want to lock yourself in your house for a year, that's fine too. You've got my support to do whatever, because I can't imagine what it must be like to lose the people you've lost. Thank you, she says. I vow to always let you grow. I'll never tell you that I know who you really are just because we've known each other since we were kids. I know you're going through a period of big change, and I'll only ever encourage that.
That is so beautiful.
That is like one of the sweeter things I've ever heard. And I think it touches back on what we were talking about, like how do you maintain a friendship through different life phases? And it's like,
you have to let people grow. You have this view of who they are. And if they decide that that's not who they are, let them either become who they want to be or let them figure out they're wrong.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, there's like an essence of all of us that stays true no matter what.
Of course.
I mean, I think you talk about it a lot and being like, you go home and you're like, yeah, I'm not shy anymore. I actually haven't been shy for 12 years. I'm actually professionally unshy to like a degree that is often criticized.
Yeah. Do you know my revelation that I had recently?
Oh my God, tell me now.
No, I already told it to you, but
I literally was about to say, I can't believe you have a single thought I haven't heard, but go.
So you know how we always argue and dissect the concept of introverted extroverts and extroverted introverts?
Yes.
I feel like my real revelation was that I am an extrovert with anxiety. And
yes,
introverted extroverts are extroverts with social anxiety, which is something that can exist.
Mm-hmm.
So then she falls in love with a guru that she interviews for an article.
He's in his 50s and his whole shtick is that he helps people pleasers and he speaks right to her heart. And he says the danger of a person like you doing therapy is that you seem clever. You will get the theory very easily, but you need to be able to like feel it in your bones. He keeps being like, be authentic. No one's ever fallen in love with a man because they were appropriate.
They have this like absolutely head over heels cartoony fall in love over text situation.
Who hasn't been there? Who hasn't been like, I've never had a deeper connection with this person that I couldn't pick out of a crowd? Isn't it crazy that the person you were supposed to be with is actually somebody that you haven't had time to hang out with in person?
Totally. I mean, this line, I rolled my eyes so hard I got a headache. You woke me up at about 5 this morning. His text read, what do you mean? I replied. He sent me a recording of the sound of the rain fall hard and then soft on the window of his bedroom. Am I the rain? I asked. Boo.
Anyway, they're texting. It's hot. It's heavy. It's intense. She's never felt like it. All of her friends are pissed because they're like out to lunch with her and she's like obsessively checking her phone. And they're like, you have to get a grip. Be careful. The fact that you call him a guru and you've fallen in love with him is like very suspicious.
They have a date planned. And then the night before, he's like, I'm staying at a friend's house nearby. And she's like, well, why don't you just come here? I can't believe you're only 10 minutes away.
And then he's like, no, let's wait for the date. And then he goes, no, I'm here. They have sex. They talk all night. She falls asleep on his chest with a tattoo on it. And she wakes up at 5 a.m. with him being like, I got to drive. And she's like, okay, do you want keys to come back? He's like, no, I just got to get drive. He texts her. He goes, I can tell you're hurt, huh? I'm so sad I hurt you. I love it when men are like, I'm sorry I hurt you. And I'm like, well, not sorry enough to have not hurt me. They never talk again. And she feels God. She's like, I can't believe I fucking fell for that shit.
I feel like it's such a quintessential experience to like fall hard and fast for like a non-relationship. And then afterwards, it's more like whiplash than sadness. You're just like, wait, what? And then, of course, she has this thing where all of her friends are coming up with theories.
Yeah. It's just like falling for a phone scam.
Yeah. You can be really sad about it, but also it's kind of nice to be like, I don't know, I still fall for stuff.
I always say I love to be scammed because it means I'm open-hearted and trusting. Sorry, I believe in my neighbor.
One of my cold hard truths is finding out that I'm kind of a romantic. And I'm just like, I don't know.
One time Ashley said that to me. She goes, I'm kind of a Charlotte. And I was like, in what way? And she's like, I kind of really do believe in love and I'm still looking. And I was like, oh, that's so true about you. You do like low-key really believe in like true love.
Ugh. Dumb. Anyway.
Something I want to say about this chapter that was my takeaway is I think one of the most dangerous things we've done to young women and like teenage girls is tell them that like all a man wants from you is sex. Because then you're like so on guard to be like, is he just using me? Is he just using me for sex? Is he just using me?
I mean, this whole thing of waiting till the 3rd date or the 5th date or the whatever, like
men will also use you emotionally. Men are also human beings who, in addition to sex, sometimes just like want that feeling of intimacy that we all crave. And that's why we all had an AIM boyfriend that we like ran home to after school that we couldn't approach in real life because we were too scared. Like everybody wants a shortcut to like feeling known and seen and compatible, even men. And I feel like I have been duped by that in my single days where I'll be like, oh my God, of course this guy likes me. We text all day, every day. Like, why would a hot guy be texting me this much if he like didn't really like me? And then it's time to meet up and they just bail or something. And you're like, wait a minute, was I used for my mind? Was I used for my heart? I feel like it's just like more confusing because nobody told you to be careful.
Yeah. Nobody told you that men also just want intimacy, not like sexual intimacy, but like emotional intimacy. And so when you're being used for emotional intimacy, it's quite jarring.
When you get ghosted by a pen pal, you're like, but I didn't even have time to not fuck you. I'm so confused.
Yeah. And she comes to kind of a wrong conclusion about this. I don't really agree. I think it's something that makes her feel better. She's like, I was too like scary to him because it was too real. And it's just like, nah, that's never true.
No, he was going through a divorce and you're like a 28-year-old who's enamored with him.
Yeah.
It's nice to be enamored with.
I think he loved being adored by you, but the end.
So afterwards, she decides to become celibate.
She realizes she's just always had a guy on the hook. And I think this is kind of what I went through like a year and a half ago, where I was like, oh, I'm always single, but I'm always seeing someone. And I always was like kind of dating a guy, always talking to someone. And then I was like, oh, what if I just like do not schedule my life around dating or the idea of dating?
And what do you think you learned? How did you think it went?
Well, I'm still single because I haven't been dating or I'm dating on dating. No, I think that this conversation is happening on TikTok now about like decentering men. I think it was like very successful in being like, oh my God, even when you're like, oh, I'll have a single era, but you're still kind of like seeking partnership quite specifically.
Well, sometimes I think a single era means like fun dating.
Yeah.
You can't really be in control if it's fun or not. It's really hard to like make sure your feelings don't always get hurt.
Yeah. And so I think doing this was kind of a good way to be like, what do I actually want out of a relationship? And then kind of waiting for that. I mean, it's still like not completely worked, but I think that like trying to separate myself from what I think guys want me to be is good. Mm-hmm. And I think it's cleared up a lot of space and time. I don't know. I was very like, cancel my plans just in case he called. I was very like, I don't know, that could be a date night. So maybe I'll keep that open because this guy that I'm kind of talking to like might want to hang out on Thursday. And then sometimes something wouldn't go the way I wanted to. Even if I was like not that emotionally invested, I was still like, well, why don't you like me though? Like, what the fuck? I would get my feelings hurt a lot for no reason.
It's such a hard balance of like staying open and not putting yourself in the face of rejection. That's why I feel like that advice where it's like, well, do you like them is so important because the ones that you have to weed out are the ones where you're like, I'm not going to get hurt by somebody I don't even like.
Yeah. And I think that kind of intentionally being like deeply single for a little bit was very helpful in centering me on what I do and don't actually like, because I think it's very easy to get caught up in like something you like enough.
Yeah. I just feel like there's that pattern of like excitement. What does this mean? Crash. And so then you like fill it with excitement. What does it mean?
Yeah. So, you know, stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Okay.
She was also writing a dating column. And then finally, when that ended, she was able to separate herself from dating a little bit because she was like, I was kind of like doing it for the plot.
I feel like that's also a hard thing with comedians. Like,
yeah.
I remember being very much like, there isn't such thing as a bad date. There's a good date or there's like a funny
story.
Yeah, like a funny date, which I do think protects you. And I think everyone, actually, I want to extend it. Anyone with a TikTok, anyone with a Twitter, anyone with a friend group that you like to be the life of. It can be hard to become your own heroine. It can be hard to be like, I'm the Sarah Jessica Parker of my own life. I think it's like good to romanticize your life, but you have to like fight the sitcomification of your life.
Yeah, it's hard.
Like you cannot go through as many ups and downs as a sitcom character because like at some point you have to start going up, you know?
Yeah. And then she has this conversation with Farley, which I think is like the absolute heart of this book, where she's saying that she doesn't really have true long-term relationship experience. I've never been in like a deeply committed relationship. And Farley was like, well, what about you and me? And she realizes that she has had these long, loving relationships with the women in her life. And so she's not lacking relationship experience. She just hasn't found the romantic love yet. Maybe all this time I'd been in a great marriage without even realizing. Maybe Farley was what a good relationship felt like. It felt like I was finally jogging on my own path, gathering my own pace and momentum. So then she stops going to events just because she, thinks there might be a guy there that she wants to see. She stops going to events just in case there might be a random person that she might meet there.
She also gets to a point in her life where like another roommate is leaving. And so she's kind of like sticking it out and being like, well, I don't know, should I get a new roommate? And somebody's like, why don't you just go out on your own? You're not the Hunger Games. It shouldn't be an endurance test among our friends to see who can stick you out the longest. In your 20s, it's easy to be like, it's all of us together. And then whether you're in a relationship or not, at some point saying, okay, well, who am I as an adult?
Yeah.
Because even if you are married or coupled up, it would serve you well to have your own sense of identity. Because I don't think the identity of married person is going to get you too far or too fulfilled.
Yeah. And I think that there is a way that our society like minimizes, along with platonic love. Mm-hmm. I think our society minimizes developing a sense of self. We're kind of taught to believe you just kind of like get it. Like you're walking along the street one day and you just step into it. And that is not true. If you don't look for it, you won't find it.
It's funny. So she's 28 and what she knows about love is looking more like what we think. Any decent man would take a woman at peace with herself over a woman who performs tricks to impress him.
Men love a naked woman. All the other bells and whistles are an expensive waste of time.
Get a Brazilian wax if you want a Brazilian wax. If you don't. If you like feeling bare and you've got the money to spend, get waxed all year round. Don't ever get one for a man and don't ever not get one for the sisterhood. The sisterhood doesn't give a shit. Volunteer at a bloody woman's shelter if you want to be useful. Don't spend hours debating the politics of your pubic hair.
That's true. Anyone can be fancied. It's far greater to be loved.
More often than not, the love someone gives you will be a reflection of the love you give yourself. If you can't treat yourself with kindness, care, and patience, chances are someone else won't either. This one I find also debatable. I definitely think if you're not a little bit happy with yourself, you're much more likely to accept very toxic, kind of shitty love. But yeah. I agree with you, this idea that it's like, learn to love yourself first. I don't know, man. I actually think being in a relationship really helped me like myself and grow into a person I wanted to be. I think it's a lot to put on single people that like you haven't passed the test of self-love.
Totally.
I'm telling you, everyone I know in a relationship, they don't fucking love themselves. That's kind of an arbitrary thing that they tell single people to be like, well, here's why you're not good enough.
Yeah, it's very similar to the like beauty standard situation where there's just like always something you can be doing and everything is your fault. Let your friends abandon you for a relationship once. The good ones will always come back. This I kind of liked. I think that there is a time that people get swept away. Fool me once. Whatever, fool me twice. All right, that was enough.
Yeah. I always say like I give him like 6 months to a year of like
boyfriend sickness.
Yeah, where you're just like always in bed with them. And then afterwards I'm like, okay, no. If you're not like
calling your friends.
Yeah, if you don't want to get brunch after a year of not hanging out, then I guess I was just kind of a placeholder.
Yeah. So then she turns 30 and has like kind of a breakdown about it because she's like, being afraid of turning 30 is truly the lamest shit in the world. It's not feminist, it's not cool. But then she freaks out about turning 30 and is embarrassed by it, which she should be because it's not that bad.
Nothing is weird for us to be doing anymore. Nothing feels like an extraordinary premature achievement. It's just what we're meant to be doing.
I guess that's true, but instead of being stressed about that fact, I felt comforted by it.
Yeah, me too. And I think I also have like met enough people that are successful and been able to be like, well, you're fucking miserable and you're insane. And like, I don't know if this is sustainable.
I think like part of aging is becoming comfortable with the fact that timelines vary.
Yeah.
And numbers and ages and all that shit doesn't really matter.
And they were talking about how they feel like all the irony of adulthood is gone. Like there's no more, well, when I grow up, it's this. You're like living your truth. But I find that very freeing. I'm really proud of the breakfast I've been making myself. It's really beautiful in the morning. I love having like a well-rounded breakfast. And somebody, I don't know, some anonymous TikTok hater was like, why do they do the most mundane shit and think it's impressive? Like obviously shitting on influencers. I don't consider myself an influencer, but whatever. And I was like, this is why you're so unhappy and commenting mean things on people's TikToks, because I do think that adulthood is mundane. And the best thing you could hope for is to make the little things that you can't escape fun and enjoyable. Life is just like a lot of breakfasts. It's every day. And if you can like have something every day that you like, that's great. And I feel like there's such a relief in that like there is never going to be one great vacation that is worth waiting for all year. There's only every single day and the best little things you can, like I love biking to work. And I really try to be like, well, how lucky am I that I love this thing that I get to do every day that I had to do anyway. And I think that's kind of the best thing you can hope for in life is to have like something that you can do every day be the thing that gives you most joy.
I'm happy with that.
She says, I never wanted to feel like I was passing through, but I feared this was the inevitability of getting older and gradually inching towards the end. They talk about like the kind of person who's just passing through, as though life is a long, boring journey and every day is a joyless overnight stay in a premier inn that they can't be bothered to unpack their suitcase. The sort of person who'd never take the time to personalize a laptop background with a photo, who picks up the same sandwich and Pret every working day for 30 years, who doesn't bother framing their prints and instead just tacks them onto the wall. I never wanted to feel like I was passing through, but I feared this was the inevitability of getting older and gradually inching toward the end, a demise in the relishing of life and an increase in simply tolerating it. And this is funny because I feel like I feel so different. Okay, when we went to Gov Ball this year, I had such a feeling of being like so happy to be old. And like that's relative to the people there. I don't think 31 is old, but like the average age was about 17. And I watched these kids run back and forth from stage to stage to stage, making sure that they never missed a single artist, but in such a way that because of that, they never got to see an entire show. The entire time was spent running to a show, being late, trying to spend the entire time getting to the front, waiting for the one song they knew, and then running as soon as they heard new music start. And I was like, oh, you're not having fun because you're chasing something. And I feel like to me, the styles people love, like eclectic grandpa, like a life well lived, like when you go to someone's home and they have so many special touches, and like when somebody gets good at a craft, when you go to somebody's house and they like can cook a dish really well or have grown a garden or done anything that they've dedicated time to, it's because they have like grown older and intentional and like hunkered down. And I feel like that is where so much of like the joy of my life has come from, is like making decisions and sticking with them and like relishing in it and getting good. And so this idea that as you get older, you're just passing through life. I feel like as you get older, you're like burrowing deeper into your own life. And that's when it gets fun.
I guess that's what you have to decide is like, are you going to keep on flitting from thing to thing and like searching for the life that is the story, or are you going to burrow deep and create the story? Yeah. Which ironically is, I think, the thing I liked most about this book is that in the mundane, she creates such a beautiful story of friendship that I think a lot of people can relate to. Like nothing that happens to her is that extraordinary.
Yeah.
But she wrote such a
relatable
book about it. Whereas there are so many people we read that are like trying so hard to sound extraordinary that instead what they write is like so out of touch to me. And so I feel that she has actually burrowed down in this identity as like a writer and a friend to create this good book. Not great book, really good book. Yeah.
I mean, the beauty of her friendship with Farley is that they've chosen to keep doing it for 20 years.
Yes.
It wasn't meeting at 12. It was like staying
because you can't
together.
Just keep passing through relationships until the one that is supposed to be your perfect relationship sticks to you. You have to choose something and burrow.
So then she has this whole thing about how youth is wasted on the young. And she's like, has anyone ever said that before? That like, if only I could be young with all the possibilities again, but with all the knowledge I have now.
And her friend is very like,
yeah,
I'll kill you.
Yeah, they've said that before. I said goodbye to the last 10 years like an old friend, one I had finally outgrown, but would remember forever, rambunctious, restless, and ramshackle, roving, raucous, and rebellious, my roaming decade, my roaring 20s.
And then everything she knows about love at 30. This one I think is really beautiful. To choose love is to take a risk, always. That's why it's called falling. No one meanders with a compass and an ordnance survey map into love. People meet with pain that they're not aware they harbor.
Inside, we're all 17 with red lips. I once read Laurence Olivier said, I agree with him with all my heart. When you're looking for love and it seems like you might not ever find it, remember you probably have access to an abundance of it already, just not the romantic kind. This kind of love might not kiss you in the rain or propose marriage, but it will listen to you, inspire, and restore you. It will hold you when you cry, celebrate when you're happy, and sing All Saints when you're drunk. You have so much to gain and learn from this kind of love. You can carry it with you forever. Keep it as close to you as you can. You would never let me hold you close.
Yeah, but like emotionally, I think we do.
Yeah.
Like spiritually.
When I hug Bug, I pass that along to you.
Yeah. Can I read the end of the acknowledgements? And finally, to you, Farley, without whose unwavering cheering and championing, I would not have written this book. You are and always will be my favorite love story. And the book is dedicated to Florence.
How fertile would you say the soil is?
I mean, I think the beauty of this book is that it's like a 2.
Interesting.
Like, I think that nothing happens and everything happens.
Yeah.
The soil in the way that we speak of celebrity memoirs, like whether or not you consider Dolly a celebrity, I guess like for me, a 5, but like legally a 2.
I love that. And how many drinks would you like to have with her? How many warm teenies?
5.
10.
I'm obsessed with Dolly Alderton.
I feel like you'll meet her.
I guess I like really don't think it's out of reach. And that's why I was nervous to do the book because I'm like, oh my God, what if we're just like kind of pals?
Yeah.
But also maybe it is so out of reach and I'm a deluge.
I don't think it's that out of reach. I was aware of that too, talking about it. And I do stand by. This book is so much like advice from your older sister.
Yeah.
But I think because I'm about her age when she wrote it, it feels like advice from your twin sister. And I'm like, bitch, I know. Like if your twin sister was like, let me tell you everything I've learned about life. And you'd be like, we fucking lived the same goddamn life.
I guess I read it being like, exactly.
Yeah.
Totally. And yeah, she's a couple years older than me. I read this a couple years ago. I found it very poignant.
I like 100% get how you could read this book and go, thank you. And like, I feel like I just needed to hear it from someone else I liked to know that I'm okay.
Yeah, she's saying a lot of things that I think are really important to be said.
Yeah, I agree. Who are our great love stories?
Ugh, the 5-star wormies, my angels.